So, thank you for the wait. So we'd like to start Animāre, the first Animāre seminar on creativity support tools. 最初だけ日本語と英語両方で喋ります。I will start by talking both in Japanese and English because there are several Japanese audiences. でただその後は、英語の、話者の方々なので基本英語になります。So let me start. First of all, what is Animāre? This is the project that we started last October, and it is, as the name denotes, it's about anime. アニマーレというプロジェクトはですね、このアニメに関するプロジェクトで去年の10月に始まったものです。And this is based on our observation and also the importance and current state of the anime industry, which is アニメ産業の重要性と現状について我々としてもいろいろ見てきていて、それを支援するという研究プロジェクトなんですけれども、整理するとですね、So there is this remarkable cultural accumulation since 1950s in this anime industry, and then the market size doubled in 10 years, 5 times overseas growth in the recent years. So it's really a rapidly expanding industry, and then it's also drawing public-private attention. はい、というわけでですね、このアニメ産業というのは1950年代から非常に顕著な文化的な蓄積があり、市場サイズもすごく伸びている成長産業であると。また産官でですね、非常に注目を集めている産業でもあります。But if we look at the production process, per 30-minute episode, there are always around 6 cardboard boxes of materials.And if it's in fully digital workflows, there are hundreds of terabytes of data generated daily. And also the production process is really complex, involving hundreds of people. でアニメ産業のその現場を見てみるとですね、1話だいたい30分のテレビアニメーションだと段ボール6箱とか、フルデジタルでいくと数百テラバイト超のデータが日々算出されると。でなおかつこの制作工程においては本当に数百名のクリエイターの方々が関与する非常に複雑な工程になっています。右に出てるのがちょっとその制作工程で出てくるそのデータとか使われるフォーマットの例なんですけれども、これで我々としてはですね、このアニメに関わる産業と学術の課題があるなという気づきを得ます。So we came to notice that there are challenges of the industry and academia concerning anime. We've actually gathered, I mean, not only me, but my co-PIs gather regularly, starting from SIGGRAPH Asia 2021, SIGGRAPH Asia 24, and there is a Japanese domestic technology-related conference about anime called ACTF. And then there is a conference called SEDEC, which is focused on games. We've continually discussed about the challenges that we are facing.And last year at ACM CHI, which is a premier Human-Computer Interaction conference, we held a special interest group on anime, shown on the right. それでですね、本当に2021年のシーグラフアジアという国際会議から何回もこういった議論を重ねてきています。シーグラフアジアの2021、2024、ただ ACTF っていう国内の技術系のアニメの会議があるんですけど、そこでも話しましたし、SEDEC というゲームの会議でも話しました。で去年はACM 会という国際会議でアニメシグという会議をやっています。それぞれの立場の研究者、研究開発責任者が集まって議論してきていて、そこで分かったこととしては、というかその整理した内容としてですね、まず産業側の課題として現場での暗黙知化が顕著で、研究者や開発者がサポートしようと思ってもなかなかその技術的な支援が困難であるということと、アカデミア側はアカデミア側でコンピューターサイエンスがカウンターパートになるというふうに考えると、その技術を作るということはいいんですけれども、技術的な新規性がないと論文にならないというような、やっぱりコミュニティのなんていうか評価軸があります。なので文化に根ざす非常に長期的な視点での研究というのが難しいという課題がありました。So we have met key stakeholders across academia and industry and organized the issue space like this. So from the industry side, there is a strong reliance on tacit knowledge in the field, making support by researchers and developers very difficult. And then from the academia side, because we have this novelty-driven kind of bias within the computer science, we struggle with long-term culture-rooted research. So given all these perspectives, we gathered and started the project called Animāre. ということで、この辺を解決しようと思ってですね、アニマーレというプロジェクトを始めました。で私一番、左にいる加藤なんですけれども、OLM デジタルというアニメの制作会社の、研究開発責任者である前島さんで、東京大学の、小山さんとともに、このプロジェクトを始めたところです。でこのプロジェクトがちょうど始まったところですけれども、一応私自身の自己紹介も簡単にしておこうと思ってこのスライド出してるんですが、自身を道具家事研究者というふうに名乗っています。So these days I call myself a toolsmith researcher. Sorry, but this is how it is in Japanese. What I do is I usually study the creative activities by people and then build tools to support these activities, and then also to study the activities again. And I have studied like programmers, musicians, and anime directors, all these people who are doing creative activities. というわけでですね、道具家事研究者としてこのようにいろいろな方々を支援するツールを作ってきていて、and back in 2023, I wrote an article that actually encourages people to look more into the wild, and also to warn that we shouldn't cherry pick the activities of artists just for the sake of research. というわけでですね、こういう学術的な場でも結構いろいろ論文とか記事を書いたりしていて、特にこの2023年の記事だと私はやっぱりもっと現場を研究者が見に行くべきだという話もしましたし、その時にやっぱり研究のためにだけに、ある意味その論文のためにアーティストの問題を都合よくつまみ出すということは絶対に避けようねということを言ったりしています。そのようなマインドでこのアニマーレというプロジェクトが始まってまして、So this is how the Animāre started, and this is how our project groups, including my group, Kato group, and Koyama group, and Amajima group, covers the entire complex anime production process. We have 5.5 years to basically build these kind of tools for the anime production, but also we do not only build tools by ourselves. We want to make the collaboration between the artists and developers and researchers.でこのような体制でやってるんですけれども、狙ってることとしてはこの研究者とか開発者とこのクリエイターの方々、アニメの制作の現場にいる方々というものがある意味その相互にやり取りができるようなプラットフォームというのが 5.5 年でできるといいなと思ってます。その時にツールを作るという一番左側の目標ももちろんあるんですけれども、そのツールを作る、技術を作る、でツールを作るということもあるんですけれども、やっぱり現場の方々と一緒に何かやっていこうねということをすごく重視していて、そのような取り組みで我々このアニマーレというプロジェクトを始めました。で特に今日はその中でもですね、このツールにフォーカスしたセミナーということで世界に名だたるですね、非常に今活躍されている研究者3名の方をお呼びして、また日本でも創造性支援ツールの研究をしてこられた中小路先生をお呼びしてですね、セミナーのモデレーターをしていただくという形になります。This is how we approach the problem, which is not only about making foundational technologies for tools and also building tools. It's also about researching in and from the wild, involving the actual creators in the anime industry. And by building a platform and tools for tools, we aim to build a sort of reciprocal mutual beneficial relationship between these people, which can be actually deployed in the real production. And then today, we have this seminar, which is focused on the tools, especially the creative support tools. And we invited 3 prominent researchers in the field of human-computer interaction. Also, we invited Professor Kumiyo Nakakoji, who has really worked for a long time about this creative support tools. So this is a kind of short introduction about the seminar from my side. And I guess I should start giving the stage to Jingyi. Thank you.
Beautiful. Okay, I think we're good. Yeah. So, hello everyone, and thank you for welcoming me to the first Animāre seminar on creativity support tools. My name is Jingyi Li. I'm an assistant professor of computer science at Pomona College, and I'm really excited to give you my talk today titled Power, Norms, and Radical Humility Towards Artistic Support Tools. So those are like a bunch of terms, but hopefully by the end of the talk you know what all of these terms mean. So my clicker is not working. Okay, great. We all know by now, hopefully, because we're all in this room together, that computation is both an artistic tool and a medium, as essential as traditional materials like paints or clay. For instance, oil painting, animation, and film cameras now have software tool analogs such as Procreate, Storyboard Pro, or Adobe Lightroom. what we in HCI research call these tools are often, we delineate these as creativity support tools, which was a term invented by Ben Schneiderman in 2002, where he talked about, okay, here are tools that deal with activities, creative production activities, such as collecting information, relating information, creating things with tools, and also donating and disseminating the tools. Some sample creativity support tools that I'm fans of that deal with the drawing domain, for instance, are IOBrush by Kumiyo Royale, which let children sample textures and draw them on new screens. A more recent tool called Painting with Cats, which was a texture synthesis project more for digital painting than for children. Professor Igarashi's work, Teddy, which was about drawing in 2D to create inflatable 3D forms, and Draco by Rubaiyat Habib, which was using kinetic animation, or basically, yeah, animating forms to make often tedious things to do manually easier with computation. But one thing that I think all these creativity support tools share in common is that they all go in the create part of Schneiderman's originally proposed framework. We as HCI researchers really like building tools that help people create new things. Even in the original NSF workshop proposal that resulted in a lot of activity around creativity support tools, with Professor Nakakoji contributed to, they said that we want to use creativity support tools to empower users to not be able to be not only more productive, but more innovative. I think when we talk about empowering users to create new artifacts in HCI, we often mean this in this power to sense. Power to is the ability to do something. Our software tools let us do things that weren't capable of before, such as undoing operations or having layers in our digital drawing tools. But I think an area of power that HCI researchers haven't paid that much attention to is the idea of power over, the relationships between actors. And what I mean by this is that if we consider artists and users as sort of the users of tools, and then the designers, developers, and researchers as another person on the side of the power dynamic, how can we better explore the power dynamics and the relationships of power when we create creativity support tools? So here are some two concrete examples. This happened very recently. Adobe Animate, also previously known as Micromedia Flash before Adobe bought them, is a very powerful tool that lets you create 2D animations. So you have the power to create things. My Little Pony, Devilman Crybaby, two popular shows that were created on Adobe Animate. I think like about a week ago, they emailed all their users and they're like, we're discontinuing Adobe Animate. So you can see that here, the developers have so much power over the users. They're just like, you don't have your tool anymore. We're gonna archive all your information. Sorry, what can you do? Well, you can complain, and people did complain. And then the next day, Adobe was like, never mind, that was a mistake. We're not taking away Adobe Animate. We're just not maintaining it anymore. So here's a reciprocal power relationship, right? The users have some power. They're like, please don't take our tool away. Like, you have to continue to maintain it. Another example is in generative AI. I think a lot of like image generators, diffusion models, this gives people who don't have the ability to draw like a lot of power. Suddenly you can create cute Studio Ghibli images of like you and your girlfriend at the beach, or Studio Ghibli recreations of memes, or if the US state, Studio Ghibli depictions of you deporting immigrants, which I think is really horrible. But at the same time, you have power over the original creators. Miyazaki was saying, oh, this is like an insult to life itself. And I think you're not really paying, like number one, there's a lot of copyright concerns, which people have talked about all the time. But I really wanted to draw attention to Henry Jia's work on this, who argues that image generators, such as diffusion models, ChatGPT, like whatever, DALL-E, Midjourney, et cetera, they're not artists because art is a uniquely human endeavor, a response to culture, a processing of emotions, while image generators are just copying inputs and outputs. So image generation, thus, is creating unequal power dynamics, especially for practicing artists. So I was really inspired by Professor Igarashi's WIST vision talk, where he was talking about like, oh, maybe easy and fast is no longer the future. Like if generative AI is cheapening and sloppifying all these artifacts and creativity support tools, if we're just here with a bunch of AI slop, like where does CST research go from here? If we're so focused on helping people make artifacts, and now we can make artifacts super cheaply and easily, but they don't capture culture or they don't seem meaningful, what can we do? I'm going to argue that I think the direction that the field is going is actually shifting from artifact-focused research to process-focused research, and focusing more on the creative process. So for instance, this was a paper that helped you recover and reflect on like failures, like if your laser cutter burns your print, like how can you learn of your creative process and how can you reflect for it better? There are some papers that, for instance, Shm is going to talk to us about on creativity support ecosystems, or Jane is going to talk about when we give feedback in the creative process. And here, this is not about necessarily creating a final artifact, but the larger, expansive definitions of creative activity and encompassing all the process. So my work specifically in this talk is that I want to tell you that we can set norms and also build tools that are radically humble in order to reduce these power gaps. If we as developers and researchers have so much power over the users of our tools, how can we sort of follow some guidelines or like decide how to actually build our tools that will help reduce these power relationships? So the first project I'm going to be telling you about is basically we developed a generative and critical theory of power. Then we sort of took our own advice. We built a tool using some of the things that we proposed here called ArtCrit, which helps people with disciplined drawing and drawing from reference images. And I'm going to end a little bit in 5 minutes towards this new vision that I'm proposing called artistic support tools, which are creativity support tools, but towards more artistic goals. And maybe creativity support tools as an artistic practice itself. Okay, so that was the intro of my talk. Let's get started. So how can we think about power dynamics in creativity support tool research? To answer this question, this was qualitative thematic analysis work. We conducted semi-structured interviews with 11 creativity support tool practitioners. These included professional artists, tool designers, and also CST researchers. And oftentimes, people were in overlap. Sometimes someone was all three of them. What we did was, through these interviews, we analyzed it with provisional coding to build some theory. We distilled these themes, and I'm going to talk about the first 4 today. So first is like, what is empowerment? We sometimes throw the word empowerment around loosely, because like, yeah, of course we want people to be empowered by our tools. That's the goal of every tool that we build. But like, what does that actually mean? So first is like, artists are not a monolithic group. Everyone has their own unique opinion, right? But here are some general trends. So like Mark Weiser's idea of UbiComp, where tools should fade into the background and tools should sort of be invisible to you during your process, a lot of artists were like, oh, empowerment is my tools fading into the background. I'm so good at using this paintbrush, I don't even notice it use it. Like, I can totally do my creative practice. We saw this similarly with tool developers. Empowerment is automations that leverage existing skills. Like an artist was like, I love the liquefy tool in Photoshop because I don't have to like, redraw this whole frog. I can just like use the tool and spatially move the frog's face. And that aligns with my existing skills. So I feel very powerful here. A tool designer agreed with this, saying like, my goal as a tool designer is to remove obstacles. So these are all empowerment in the sense of power to, like power to do things in your creative practice. But on the other hand, we saw other more diverse definitions of empowerment. Empowerment was not efficiency for this participant, but it was deliberate seeing. They were like, when I draw a picture of something, it's also time I get to spend looking at it and thinking about all the little objects in it. Just reflecting a little bit, spending time with that picture and all the memories I associate with it. So here they drew a picture of the corner of their parents' kitchen, and to them it was empowering to actually sit with the process and think about their parents and think about the memories of creating art rather than like doing the art itself, if that makes sense. And we saw this with another participant who said, my art directs the gaze on the powerful rather than the marginalized. It's trying to authentically capture my kind of subjectivity and worldview. So here they made a typography, like they made a custom font. And what they did for the custom font was take images of celebrities in computer vision data sets and selectively mark them out. So if you squint your eyes, you can actually see this as Jeff Bezos, but it's made from faces in a computer vision data set. So for them, empowerment was an act of power over, of getting the audience of their art to get their perspective and adopt it and like understand how they saw the world. So one thing that I think we're seeing now in HCI is that in the first wave of HCI, it was all about helping people be more productive. It was like, how can we help the word processor be faster, or how can we help these like, tasks at work? But I think now, in the sense of creativity, in the sense of artists who are trying to do really, really weird things, for instance, P5, who said the interesting things are doing what tools are not designed for, it's hard to design for empowerment because artists always want to do something different. They feel empowered when they can appropriate the tools, when they can misuse the tools. So if empowerment is not designed for, I'm going to argue 2 very practical things. Our tools should allow for both vertical movement and horizontal movement. So what do I mean by vertical and horizontal movement? Well, if you've heard of the ladder of abstraction, that's going to be vertical movement. So let's say I'm doing typography in Adobe Illustrator. At the very highest level of abstraction, if I want to like do typography, I can just choose a different font, right? Like that's a very easy option for me. But if I don't like the default kerning of that font, then I can edit the kerning in the GUI. And at the very lowest level of abstraction, I can edit the vector paths directly. So I have multiple touch points into doing this creative practice on this ladder of abstraction. And for instance, if the vectors I don't like for some reason, I could move horizontally to a different tool, such as here now using Photoshop to edit the font as pixels. So now I'm going to introduce the definition of this term called normative ground. A normative ground is the way a tool structures its practitioners' ideas, goals, and intentions, shaping how someone thinks, acts, and expresses themselves. What I mean by that is, so if you're an HCI researcher, maybe you've seen this diagram before. It's very famous from cognitive science. You learn about it in all your undergrad classes, about like the interaction cycle and thinking about it from like semantic and articulatory distances and stuff. But I think one thing that this viewpoint of how we interact with computers and how we interact with tools does not capture is this idea of normativity, this idea of culture, this idea of I'm using this tool because I'm using Illustrator because I want to work in vector graphics and I want things to look clean. Like this is what I mean by normative ground. So more examples of normative ground. Normative ground affects people's mental models. So we had a participant talk about how Illustrator was really hard for them to learn because they grew drawing on like 2D sheets of paper, but Illustrator is a vector program. But once they learned, oh, I can use like Boolean operations and like, for instance, create the mouth of this frog by like subtracting the shapes, this is a totally different mental model than just like drawing with raster pixels in Photoshop. So they were like, oh, like this is the normative ground of Illustrator, that we should be working in vectors. Normative ground is also about aesthetics. We had participants who were anime artists saying like, oh, I use Paint Tool Sci for everything because all my friends use Paint Tool Sci. And Paint Tool Sci is great for anime style art. So that's why I use the tool, right? Like it's not because of any power to how to have your art look in a certain way. It was more just like the norms and of the community that you're participating with. We see the same thing in like AI generated art, where I feel like as the results got better or maybe more aesthetically uniform, a lot of artists were pushing against that aesthetic, being like, I don't like the aesthetic of AI generated art, like I'm really trying to specifically set myself away from these norms. So norms also have power over other people, such as like, even if you're not an AI artist, you're influenced by the normative ground of AI art and the cultural connotations that it has. Okay, so here's sort of the paradox of empowerment that I see. As tool designers, we want to make certain operations easier with the tool. We want to be like, here we've identified a problem, and then we've built a tool, and this tool solves this problem and makes it easy in a certain way. However, if artists are always trying to misuse tools and trying to do weird things with tools, then the decision for us to make certain operations easier may actually result in uninteresting art. That is to say, going back to normative ground, tool designers unavoidably exert power over their users by enacting a normative ground through their tools. Every time you build a tool, you create a normative ground. You're situating it in some way, and then the artist has to respond to the norms of the tool that you create. But that's why I advocate for horizontal and vertical movement. If people can appropriate your tools, if people can extend your tools, if people can use them in a larger ecosystem, then they're not trapped in the normative ground of your tool. They can use anything that they want in their existing creative practice, and this might help mitigate uneven power dynamics. So what does that look like in practice? I think as CST researchers, we're very good at creating abstractions ourselves. We see a problem, we create an abstraction to solve that problem, and we're like, yes, this is the research contribution. But instead, I would encourage us to actually build composable primitives rather than abstractions. Primitives means that artists can build their own abstractions. They can work in the ways that they need to for their unique goals as their goals change over time. So that's for vertical movement. And for horizontal movement, I would say that it's important to standardize data representations. The reason why people can move from like Krita to Clip Studio Paint to Photoshop to all these digital drawing tools is like because we have like PNG file formats or like JPEG file formats. Like everyone knows how to read a file. But there are also a lot of bespoke tools with their own bespoke file formats. how can we help people move horizontally in an ecosystem if that is a barrier to entry there? And I also think we had a discussion, I think over dinner yesterday, of the importance of developing open source tools, or at least exposing APIs of your tools, so other people can go build on top of them, as opposed to, as Jun Kato mentioned, like the novelty bias in HCI, where we just create our own tools and no one can sort of build on top of them or interact with them. It's just sort of like an idea prototype, and then we toss it and we move aside. So towards this, I want to encourage that we think about creativity support tools as technology probes. Oftentimes, when we're building CSTs, we're like, this is the way to go. We've thought of these design goals, and then here we evaluate the design goals, and this shows that our tool is good. But instead, if we think of things as technology probes that will reveal things about creative practice, that will uncover mysteries that we might have not even thought about when we were designing the tools, I think that is a way to potentially mitigate power imbalances. It gives more power to the users of the tool to be able to teach us their knowledge, and as opposed to us sort of enforcing our knowledge on them. The slide is an example of a CST that I think is a really great technology probe, which was helping novices 3D print in weird ways in public, such as like making a giant Stanford bunny out of these like giant balloons. Okay, so the takeaways of this first project is that I think while CST research has traditionally considered power to forms of empowerment, how can we make things better with our tools? We should also think of power over, like how do social relationships and how do norms influence tool usage? Tools enact a normative ground, and these norms dictate how users interact with and even conceive of what's possible with the tools. So one way to avoid, we can't avoid a normative ground, one way to give users more power through moving to different normative grounds is through vertical and horizontal movement. So because tools are not done in isolation, they are done in an ecosystem. Okay, now the second project, I'm going to show an example of a tool that we actually built that enacts some of these principles. How can we build and evaluate tools to support learning processes? Specifically, here, we're doing the learning process of disciplined drawing. Sorry, I need to drink some water. My throat is very dry. So disciplined drawing is basically the practice of replicating a reference image to improve your technical skills. And it has a very long history tradition. So here's The Fall of Man by Titan, and then here's a piece of art by Rubens that was basically using that as a reference image. And it's even cross-cultural. Van Gogh did this plum tree as a reference to this Hiroshige wood block print of cherry blossoms. But disciplined drawing is not always easy. So here's a study of Solomon Tor's work, The Green Trio, by one of our undergraduate authors, Asya. And it does not go directly from the reference to the final study. Anyone who's ever drawn knows that, you first have to block out the composition, then maybe you work out the values, then maybe you do the color on top of that. And if you're an artist who's learning how to draw, you have a lot of human guidance in this. Maybe you have feedback from your art teacher or your friends, you send them works in progress. So you have both guidance and feedback, and it's an iterative cycle of drawing. However, we know that art teachers aren't always available. So here, ArtCrit, our system, was trying to see, okay, how can we help in this process through machine feedback? So before I show you a demo of ArtCrit, I wanted to talk a little bit about the development values. So ArtCrit is called ArtCrit because it's a Krita plugin. Krita is an open source drawing software, and this is going back to the idea of horizontal movement. We wanted to go with the existing normative ground of Krita, so we wanted to make a plugin for Krita, and then Krita supports all kinds of file types and stuff. So like for instance, in our study, a lot of people didn't work Krita artists, they were Procreate artists, but it was easy for them to copy paste their artwork into Krita for feedback. And the main development value that I want to talk about here is this idea of radical humility, which is the tools that we build are not answers to problems, but rather probes for the creative process. ArtCrit has some generative AI in it, which you'll see later, but it's never for the final result. It's only for scaffolds that users can interpret and say, oh, I like using this, I don't like using this. And in the tool design, when they said, oh, I don't like using this, that was just as important to us as when they did like using it. I think radically humble tools means that if a user doesn't like a feature, if they ignore a feature, if they misuse a feature, that's actually really important. That's just as important as us seeing if a user uses a feature or not. So speaking of misuse, I just wanted to give a shout out to this other paper that some undergrads, Ace and Isabel, led, which was about creative misuse. And when I use the term misuse, oftentimes misuse has like a negative connotation. We're not saying that at all. Actually, we really value creative misuse because it means it's the artist doing something that we as researchers did not anticipate and that we did not expect. Use and misuse are basically the same set of actions, just under different normative grounds and under different cultural judgments. Okay, so here is an art crit walkthrough of basically Asya drawing the Tor feature. So what we have first is we have basically a panel on the right, and it has three features: composition, value, color. So in the composition panel, we just like have very simple grids like rule of thirds, but we also have adaptive grids. So with an adaptive grid, you can draw a bounding box over objects of interest, or you can also text prompt them. And then we will give you these adaptive new composition lines as a way for you to reference as you're laying out your image. Through these lines, we also give you feedback, which are these sort of rough contours. So here, Asya can see that, oh, maybe her figures aren't placed exactly well. So she's going to go ahead and sort of move them to better match these rough contour lines. So that's sort of our support and both scaffolding and feedback for composition. In terms of value, you know, when you like squint your eyes to sort of like get the value sense, well, you don't have to squint your eyes anymore. It's a very simple computational feature of just we blur it and then we put it smaller so you can reference the value images. That's the scaffolding. And in terms of feedback, you can press a button to compare the two canvases. So here you can see there's like highlighted areas, and you can see the actual values and the highlighted areas to be like, okay, your value is a little bit darker than what the canvas values are. Color works pretty similarly. We have a color isolation feature, which groups colors if you wanted to see them all together on like a background color of your choice. And the color feedback is very similar to value feedback. You press a color and then it will highlight, this is the region of color in your canvas, this is the region of color in the reference, and give you some like hue saturation verbal feedback for that as well. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we actually generate these composition lines. We can start from a text prompt or just a bounding box of what you want to find. It goes to Grounding Dino, which is a generative system, and then also SAM to help you segment and label these objects. From these rough contours, we basically find points, and then this is a ransack-based composition line fitting algorithm where it takes 2 points, it randomly picks 2 points from 2 different objects, tries to draw a line between them, and basically takes the line that connects the most points possible, and that is like the main composition line in the image. So then we find the line that connects the second most points, the third most points, etc., to get all our eventual adaptive grid lines until there are no points, not enough points remaining. So that's how ArtCrit works, but I think what's more exciting is actually how do people use ArtCrit? So, and we did a lab study for a WISP paper, which was just like 5 participants in the lab, but we also then did a 3-week longitudinal study, which is like under review, but I wanted to tell you about the results because I think they're somewhat interesting. So from the lab study, we did see that ArtCrit could support different workflows. So when I'm talking about let's study use, non-use, and misuse, here's the use. So this person was drawing a Skarmory Pokemon card, and you can tell that they basically start with the color feature. While this person was drawing this Serant painting, and then they were starting more with composition, right? So different workflows are accommodated by ArtCrit, which is great. AI features also enact new norms. So usually when we learn to draw a face, we draw a circle, we draw crosshairs, we place the eyes and nose on the crosshair. But because this participant used the AI like adaptive generated lines, you can see that they're drawing the face in a different way in response to these lines. So I thought that was really fascinating of like, oh, it's actually changing the process of how they're drawing because they're reacting to the scaffolds that we have here. Some results from our longitudinal study. Well, before I talk about the results, let me tell you a little bit about the study structure. So we organized 9 participants into 3 communities of practice, basically of a shared cultural background. So our 3 groups were art students / people who basically considered themselves professionals because they were about to graduate from an art college, art majors at a non-art college who are more like hobbyists, and then creativity support tool researchers who are also artists themselves. And we did something a little weird in the study, which was a researcher also participated in each group. So we're not saying like, oh, the researcher data is trying to like contaminate the participant data, but rather we wanted to create like a social supportive community for this study. So for instance, here's group 1 with the art majors at an art college, and basically we drew one piece each week and everyone drew the same piece. So this is the reference image, and then here's like everyone's images. This is group 2 of the art majors at a non-art college, and then this is group 3 of the creativity support tool researchers who are also practicing artists. So some things that we found through this study is that researchers can also set normative ground. So for instance, in this group, which was creativity support tools were also researchers that I participated in, we did this study, it's Madam M, and I really wanted to draw fan art of Jacinthe from Pokemon Legends ZA. So I was like, okay, I'm going to interpret Madam M as Jacinthe. And the second I posted my work in progress, another participant from another group was like, wait, are we allowed to interpret the reference photos? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like, we want it to be ecologically valid. You should do master studies how you're used to doing master studies. For me, I get bored if I'm just sort of like copying something, so I always want my interpretation of it. I didn't know it at the time. At first, I was just like encouraging participants to draw what they would normally draw for ecological validity. But this actually, I feel like, set a normative ground for the whole study, and that we saw a bunch of other participants then customizing their master's study pieces. In these groups, we take Zhang Zhiyong Cheng's idea of artist support networks, and we want to argue that if you create artist support networks in your user study, then you have instances of validating individual creativity. Like, even though everyone drew the same thing, all the comments were supportive of like, oh, this is so cool. Oh, I love how you did this unique thing. Like, people were talking about that. And also artist support networks help participants inspire each other. So in our group, we had someone who was a trackpad pixel artist, and then everyone in that group decided to use their trackpad for the drawing in week 2 because they were inspired by the pixel artist. I think the video feed just cut off, but I think you got it. So we saw that what ArtCrit helped people do was to purposefully slow down and have friction in their processes to reflect, echoing theory about reflective creators by Kreminski and Mateus. One participant said that ArtCrit was sort of like eating your vegetables. Like, normally you don't slow down that much to do a master study, or normally you just want to jump into it, but once you're forced to do it, you see why it's a nourishing and valuable thing to do. One thing that I thought was very interesting about the kinds of feedback people used and didn't use was that they often followed ArtCrit's feedback for composition and value, but not for color. They were like, actually, I don't care that my colors are too saturated. That's my personal style. Or like, I don't care that things are too yellow. That's my personal style. So I think that helped me learn, okay, maybe it's composition and value that tell us the forms of a painting, but then color is more like your personal style. Speaking of misuse, I thought this was super interesting. So we made our value and color feedback for feedback, right? It's like highlighting regions that are similar and different. But one participant actually used it for scaffolding, for drawing in the first place. They were like, I would look at the feedback panel, and then I would see all these sharp shapes from the neon contours, and then that's how I'd actually draw. I would draw from the sharp shapes of the value feedback. So really, to them, it wasn't feedback. It was a way of creating the image in the first place. So I tell you all of this because I think overall, we should be thinking of creativity support tool user study evaluations as opportunities for meaningful artistic engagement. So all of our participants, like, regardless of if they liked ArtCrit or not, some of them were like, I would never use it again because I draw in Clip Studio Paint and I would never open Krita. They were like, yeah, it was actually a lot of fun to be a part of the study because I could draw in a supportive community. I got paid pretty well. Like, we gave them $250. And it was a good excuse. It was a good excuse to do my creative practice, right? I think a lot of current like CST evaluations, maybe it's more measurement focused. Maybe it's more like Likert scale data, like p-value, statistical significance. But I think that is part of, you know, the power and balance between researchers and artists. if we're co-creating evaluations with participants, if researchers are participating in the evaluations, this to me is kind of the same idea as participatory design. We're not designing the tool, but rather we're designing the evaluation experience together. We're designing artistic support networks for the participants to be able to have fun and create meaningful art with together. So I think that is one way to, again, further mitigate the power dynamics between researchers and artists. So last 2 minutes, I just want to really talk quickly about this idea of artistic support tools. And I think all of these are sort of new value sets in creativity support tool research. So in the previous slide, I was like, here we can mitigate power dynamics between researchers and their users. What if researchers are artists themselves? So this is the idea of artistic support tools. In addition to supporting creative goals, we can also build tools that support artistic goals. So I'd say historically, creative goals at HCI have been like, let's build artifacts faster. Let's build new artifacts that we haven't been able to do before. What are artistic goals? What if we can reflect on how sad we are? What if we can have a tool that helps us change our perspective? What if we have a tool that can help us comment on culture? This went through the rounds on Twitter recently, and I would actually say that this is an artistic support tool, even though the person who built it probably doesn't even know what an AST is. It's called Anti-Render. It's just a generative AI system. You upload an architectural render, and it will give you that render on a gloomy day in November. So I think this is an artistic support tool because it's a comment on culture. It's a comment on how optimistic and pro-capitalist these architectural renders are. And it's saying, no, we need to be realistic and think that these buildings will look like this most of the time, unless, of course, you live in sunny California like me, where they actually do look like this most of the time. So I think this is sort of an artistic support tool. It's not about creating an artifact better or faster or easier, but a comment on culture. And the point here is that I think building tools itself can be an act of artistic practice. Like you yourself, through making a tool, you are the artist. You can have a message, you can have a meaning. So Shm, Jane, and I all submitted this in an AST pictorial submission, so they'll talk to you about their specific artistic support tools, but this was mine, and it was just a Discord channel. So it was because our collaboration took place on Discord, and I was like, I don't think we need to code to be able to make a tool. I wanted to push back against the idea that all tools have to be technical. So basically, I wanted people to make a collaborative anime music video together, and it like Exquisite Corpse, I showed the last frame of the previous person's submissions, so then the next person could use that last frame to start their video clip. What happened was people just posted in the Discord when they wanted to submit a video clip to me, and then they basically went through this ritual where I asked them a few questions, such as Likert-based questionnaire emails, the most recent creativity support tool they use, and something about a tech company. So this to me was like, can a creativity support tool just be an excuse to make an AMV with friends? Because for me, how I got started in this area and how I got started drawing was through these online image boards called oikakis, where basically I drew a bunch of Pokemon fan art and I made a bunch of friends this way. And I was like, this doesn't exist anymore in the modern internet. Like, how can we bring these kinds of experiences back? So in reality, the only thing that mattered about the response was this. If you had to pick a publicly traded tech company to work for or that you hate, which one would it be? And this was a comment and basically callback to this generative AI piece called Mosaic Virus by Anna Ridler, where she changed the random seed of her tulips to be the current price of Bitcoin. So this was my artistic statement in that I asked them a bunch of Likert questions, which I think personally is not the best way to capture evaluative metrics of creativity support tools. But in reality, the only thing that matters are our tech overlords and sort of the people who control the tools that we make in the first place. So here are the people that participated and made a video together. And I don't know if the audio is going to work, but we're going to try our best. Here's a few clips. Oh my God, it's really loud from my computer. Sorry, you probably can't hear it, but it's really loud for me. So what's happening, let's start over the clip. This is a Lucky Star clip. It was actually Shim's contribution. Then Jane used her artistic support tool called Critter Canvas to recreate that store in Critter Canvas. And then I remixed Critter Canvas by taking a screen grab of it and actually showing the processing code that resulted from that. So going back to the frame of power in artistic support tools, a traditional creativity support tool framing, has the tool designers, developers on one side, and then the users on the other side. But I would argue in an artistic support tool, researchers are artists, they're one and the same. And then the user is both a reader, an audience, and a co-constructor of art. right? If we can talk about art theory, it's like, oh, does it, like, we care about the audience interpretation of art? Here, the tool is not just a tool, it's a cultural artifact. So I think this is another way of thinking of power dynamics of, okay, users have a lot of power because they're the audience, they're the constructor, they're the recipient of some kind of art artifact that you as the researcher have made. So to conclude my talk, we talked about how we can build radically humble creativity support tools and use them as design probes to learn about human creative activity. We learned about how evaluations shouldn't just be extractive measures, but they can be opportunities for meaningful artistic engagement. We learned about how we can build tools which are themselves works of art. This is called practice-based research. But these are certainly just sort of my goals. I feel like my goals aren't everyone's goals in creativity support tool research. For instance, in the Animāre project, I feel like they're more concerned with building useful composable tools for production pipelines. I feel like if you're asking a bunch of professional animators, oh, please participate in like a 3-week study of like master's studies, they'd be like, oh, but I already draw so much for work, like I don't have time for that, as opposed to our participants who are like, no, like I actually do want time, more time to draw. And we don't even have to build tools at all. And we'll see in the next 2 talks, we don't necessarily have to build tools, but we could potentially study other aspects just as central to creativity, such as data organization or distribution, stuff like that. So my final takeaway is that tool design is not just technical design. It's not just about the algorithmic contributions that our tool makes, but I would also argue our values that we put in our tools are just as important. Because as HCI researchers, this is how we shape the field. We inspire people with our values, and maybe they adapt the values, and then we form a cohesive research agenda together. So that's my talk. Thank you so much. And I guess I'll give the floor to Jane now.
Thank you. Thank you, Jingyi, for the beautiful talk. All right, so thank you. And please have a stage, Jane.
Yeah. I just want to thank June for the invitation and just generally planning this amazing trip for us. So I'm going to just jump right in. I want you to imagine a world where for any type of new skill that you want to learn, that you want to experience, you're given the right guidance in the moment to sort of gradually learn and develop the expertise that you need to try to approach this task. So this is what my work explores and what my work tries to realize through these tools that can embed this computational guidance, kind of like having an instructor looking over your shoulder and helping to provide feedback, but without that pressure of having someone watching. But how do we characterize expertise and what types of guidance are helpful? So in particular, my work leverages this lens that experts have trained their eyes to see in a certain way and put a lot of work into doing so. So radiologists know how to scan this sort of thing, the scan to identify irregularities. On the left, you see the path of an expert's gaze that ultimately led to identifying that circled region as an irregularity. And on the right, chess masters are able to visualize many steps at a time at these impressive speeds. As a novice, even with these visualizations as support, I can't follow what he's describing at all. So maybe providing novices with all of an expert's vision immediately might not be that approachable. However, there have been steps towards exploring how to give novices sort of some of that vision, and in doing so, help them come up with the next steps that they might not be able to do on their own. So researchers found that using these image manipulations that subtly guide novices to unknowingly actually follow an expert's scan path significantly improved their ability to identify irregularities. So in fact, they even saw this evidence of short-term lingering effects where participants continued to perform better even after this gaze manipulation was disabled. And then on the right, you see this popular online chess platform visualizing some aspects of expert vision by showing probabilities that either color might win for a given move, next steps in top games, and visualizing these moves directly on the board with these arrows and colored highlights. But how might we design systems that capture and embed that type of expert vision in general? So arguably AI, in fact, already takes steps towards allowing us to leverage expert vision. So if you think about object detection models, they embed our visual expertise as humans at identifying objects into their data sets through this kind of labeling process. Or Gen AI tools have sort of taken this a step further, allowing users to seemingly perform as experts to create this like new content, like a logo design, without having necessarily learned any visual skills and tools. So we've seen that this ability to leverage existing expertise and knowledge to act as an expert has had quite an impact. However, rather than focus primarily on this technology, as an HCI researcher, like many here, I focus on the person as an active and dynamic part of that equation. So I aim to sort of help them learn and grow and evolve as a person. So how can we help novices not just perform and act as an expert, but actually help novices work towards becoming experts themselves? And how can we design systems that actually help them in developing that expertise? So one specific way in which my work has explored this is by focusing not on generating the final output to be used, as you already heard Jingyi kind of say, but on generating these intermediates that capture some expert perspectives to allow users to practice these perspectives or see like experts while authoring their own output. So much of my work has started in this art domain, as in art and creativity, this concept of the user's own agency and ownership versus that of the system or the AI is core to whether AI or a tool can really help instead of harm the artist. Additionally, this concept of training the artist eye is a fundamental part of the practice, and art education focuses already on training students to develop their own eye and their own perspective, and we can learn from their approaches. So this idea is what inspired the title of this talk, Artistic Vision. So specifically, my work asks, how might computational tools provide feedback and guidance that can support novices in developing this artistic vision? So let's take a look at how this is trained in traditional art classes. As many of you might be familiar with, these often happen in the smaller studio-based settings where students are able to get a lot of practice, both giving and receiving feedback through critiques or crits. And while a lot of these classes start by teaching how to follow certain artistic principles or rules, this practice of regular feedback and dialogue also allows the student to flexibly learn how to then break some of those rules as they develop their own voice in their practice. So I'm going to use a concept here from my own work as an example, so composition. As a student starting out, you may look at these images and ask, how should you describe the composition? Are they well composed? There isn't really a right answer, but experts have a range of representations of this concept at their disposal and can immediately see these significant shapes and lines in this image. So looking at one of the most common approaches, rule of thirds, an expert can identify that these are probably the most relevant lines as they align with important objects and boundaries in these images. However, they aren't necessarily the best representations, as many other strong lines here aren't being represented by the rule of thirds. So instead, an expert might see that this more complex grid, called the harmonic armature, might better represent these images here. So how do expert instructors train novices to practice this type of vision? Specifically, art instructors actually often give feedback in this kind of manner, leveraging visual annotations to externalize some of their thinking. So here you can see how visualizing these abstract compositional ideas might make them feel more concrete and actionable. So instead of asking, like, is this well composed, the question can now become more like, do I like the shapes that are being formed? Do I want these elements to be aligned? And in general, I'm quite interested, like across domains, in this type of visualization and what is embedded in terms of expert concepts and knowledge in these externalizations. So inspired by these types of visual feedback, we wonder if computational tools have the potential to further close this feedback loop. So here you can see in one of my systems providing this information and guidance in the moment as users explore options and make decisions about their designs. So rather than feeling like lost and intimidated here, we see this tool immediately kind of supporting this novice and easily trying to test out new concrete actions while framing this photo. So the participant places the subject of the photo at these different intersection points in the overlaid grid. And notice how this grid influenced her to make these kind of bigger jumps from one intersection point to the next, allowing her to explore more broadly due to this sort of simpler and more structured search space. So here we also see how having these different highlighted lines gave participants new ideas to explore.
The side of the bench to align with the diagonal that was highlighted.
She goes on to say that she didn't actually see it fit into this corner until the line on the screen showed up. So the highlighting also provided confirmation to the participants, making them feel more confident in their photos.
Okay, I see the lines that I want lighting up. So this looks good. Oh yeah, it's really nice because the lines like go through the bulbasaur.
So motivated by the potential of expert vision for inspiring concrete exploration, we aim to explore the potential of computational tools that scaffold users to practice this expert vision as they perform key intermediate actions throughout their design process. So in this, my approaches kind of align with what Jingyi just mentioned about encouraging this intentional slowing down for reflection with the hope that novices here can gradually develop an understanding of their artistic preferences through making these different artistic decisions along the way. So in particular, I'll break them down by the expert vision embedded and the intermediate actions that are enabled for novices when using guidance provided in each project. So in this case, our composition overlay supports this understanding of composition through overlaying the grid. And this, we actually use a different method. We use saliency here to understand and encourage this association between the concept of composition and then areas of visual attention, or the salient areas. These high-level grid representations made it easier then to also more widely explore the space of possible compositions and also highlighted these new different composition ideas for participants to try. And so as described in Professor Nakakoji's paper, many of my projects here kind of fit in this category of dumbbells. They're sort of meant to help users train their creative skills or creative muscles, as kind of shown in the figure at the top. So I'll be using a project each as a representative example of these following dimensions or stages, per se, of artistic vision. So we just saw one example of this thread of work that kind of looks at supporting awareness of an artistic concept. Next, presenting different options and examples as inspiration. And finally, providing feedback to identify potential problem areas to reflect on. Relating back to our earlier chess example, we see these dimensions or stages as highlighting a single piece to help make the player aware that maybe that piece has a move that you could consider. Additionally, displaying the options that you could choose as ideas, possibly based on the gameplay of experts. And then finally, actually providing guidance with an interpretation of the goodness of an idea by surfacing potential issues, such as another piece that might, you need to watch out for if you make the suggested move. So we showed how awareness of composition could influence how users considered possible compositions for their image. However, in other domains like lighting, even with this awareness of maybe there's bad lighting, it can be difficult to know what might be good approaches for fixing it. So for portrait lighting in particular, the important context is the lighting surrounding us in the environment. So to encourage exploration of this space, we want to make sure users are aware of their current lighting and lighting style options in the context of their environment. Professional photographers often have a range of lighting styles that they consider. However, most novices aren't aware of these different styles. But even with this set of options for inspiration, like how do I decide which ones are good for my purpose and how do I recreate them? So we'll start by thinking about how to create these lighting styles. So here, this lighting style is called loop. It's characterized by the strong light on the right side of the face, and then this triangle on the left cheek. So to create this look, the photographer carefully set up the studio as shown in the top-down diagram to the left. So the light source is precisely angled to the right side and slightly above the face to form that desired key triangle that you saw. Here's another more dramatic look called Badger. It's characterized by that shadow along the center line of the face, and it requires two lights placed slightly behind the face. Now consider taking a portrait in a natural environment like this one without kind of control of studio lights. Can we still achieve these studio-like lighting styles without these studio lights? In many such cases, you can still achieve a wide range of looks just by having the subject rotate to different angles in place. So with this insight, we wondered if we might be able to support novices in considering a range of lighting options and in achieving sort of a desired lighting style without needing such a studio setup. So first, the photographer has to capture the environment map. Here we use a 360 camera. Taking inspiration from the earlier poster, we recreated a number of those lighting styles using these virtual setups. Taking in the context of the current environment, the tool then calculates the optimal angle for the closest match to each of those lighting styles we designed and previews the best matches to the user. So it's also able to determine if some styles are unattainable in the current environment, and those are displayed in gray. So now let's say we pick butterfly, this relatively evenly lit lighting style. Such even lighting is often used for fashion magazines as they create this sort of bright and energetic look. So now following the guidance on the interface, the photographer guides the subject to turn a little less than 90 degrees clockwise. And then once we're at the right orientation, we take the photo, giving us the even lighting of that butterfly style. So in order to provide guidance that can help photographers explore these different lighting options, we need an approach for actually computing these best match orientations. For the sake of time, I'll try to go through this very quickly, but here is our current lighting estimated by the render labeled B, and then on the right side we have the corresponding environment map, L. So here our target, the one that we want to achieve, is loop again, and in order to compute an optimal angle, we need to determine how close the current lighting is to the target lighting that we want. So looking at lighting similarity, the most important thing we want to identify and focus on is just areas of light and areas of shadow. So we generate this weighting function that basically captures that. So where there's areas of light, they're orange or more positive, and areas in shadow are blue or negative. And then once we have this orange and blue weighting function, we just multiply the two images together and generate a score that says how similar the current lighting is to the target. And so in this case, our score is 289, and we call that our similarity quality metric. So that gives you one value at this orientation, and then we can rotate the environment to compute a new value. So we can keep rotating. And here, for this target and environment, 23 degrees right here is the optimal orientation with the highest quality metric of 332. And then for this scene, we also captured corresponding photos at all different angles. So as you scrub through the other rotations, you can notice how the light changes, and on the other side, like at the lowest point, the light is flipped on the other side of the face. In our user study, we found that participants liked that they were able to capture different lighting styles. I was more intentional about lighting and the environment my subject was in. I only really knew about one lighting style before this. I really liked that it gave me an assortment of different lighting options and told me which were possible in the given environment. I never realized how many there were to choose from. Another participant said, I liked that it made me think beyond just the content of the photo, but also pay attention to where the light sources are. It makes me feel like I can take much more dramatic and varied photos in a limited space. So looking back at our approach, in this case, by representing portrait lighting as this gallery of lighting styles and corresponding orientation angles, participants were able to consider varied lighting styles in the context of the current lighting situation. And it drew awareness to light and lighting styles on the face within the 2D image, but also extended to how it relates to the rest of the scene in the 3D physical space. And it introduces this specific kind of action to take of reorienting the subject in place to adjust lighting. So next, I'll illustrate this last dimension here with a project on understanding when and how to provide principled feedback for visual design. And before I do that, I want to give some context. So around when I was finishing my PhD, I realized that through these projects, the question I really wanted to ask was, when is guidance maybe too much? In particular, a lot of that guidance avoided giving answers. For example, it didn't say what is a good composition or what is good lighting. But just generally, these questions weren't asked directly in the work in building these systems. So While our goal also with these was to sort of scaffold in order to reduce intimidation and barriers to entry, tying back again to Jingyi's power paper and presentation, it is still us as designers setting this normative ground of what should be considered when you're taking photos and imposing that power over the user. So at the core, my research here asks sort of how should, and more importantly, maybe shouldn't tech, AI, or just computation generally be influencing human creativity? And what should or shouldn't a tool have opinions on? And so during my postdoc, I started to try to ask those questions a little more directly through experiments rather than sort of just embedding these hidden values in the systems that I designed. So as real-time immediate feedback becomes increasingly available with advances in AI, in this next project we ask, so what is the potential impact, both benefits and harms, of not providing just like principled guidance like the composition grid, but actually directly providing opinionated feedback on visual design principles? So here you can see two experts providing feedback on unity and alignment in this design. So they mentioned that there are too many different text treatments, so fonts, colors, font weights used in all different ways, and that this content is maybe should be instead aligned to the two sides and better aligned horizontally. This type of feedback can be incredibly helpful, especially for novices just kind of starting to learn to apply these principles. So we explore this question through this design probe, embedding feedback directly into a visual design tool. So here the purple notification dot appears, meaning that the tool has feedback available. The user requests feedback. Two issues here have been identified: not enough space between content and insufficient margin. So she clicks on the first issue to expand the description. It states that the specific instance of the issue is that the dancer in the image and title appear to be too close together. It then provides an explanation of the issue to justify the feedback and provides some actionable recommendations. So these are characteristics of high-quality feedback as described in education literature: specific, justified, and actionable. So the user clicks to read the next issue. And then given the suggestions from the feedback, she makes some small adjustments of the text. And now the image, and is now happy with her final design. So while here we only demonstrate a single feedback request, the idea is that maybe the participants can request throughout their design process. And so in addition to our user interface, I want to highlight here also, because of the open source discussion, that we designed our study platform to hopefully make it easier for others to also sort of enable similar studies, leveraging this kind of study design to ask other questions around feedback interactions, or even possibly customize the types of feedback to their own principles and priorities. Just as computational feedback of all forms are becoming really immediately available everywhere, it's, I think, especially important to look at learning sciences to understand how feedback actually best supports learning and how implications of computational feedback might also differ from things we've already seen for human feedback. So it includes this wizard interface for the expert feedback provider to annotate feedback while being blind to condition, and then an experimenter interface who would then be able to use that to determine, based on the criteria of the condition, when feedback actually shows up for the participant. So in response to the feedback, participants would explore a wide range of adjustments. So this participant chose a new background image in response to her first piece of feedback. And then after a second feedback request, explores this wide range of design changes, as you just saw, resulting in this completely new text layout. Participants generally appreciated that the feedback helped increase their overall awareness of design principles.
That I previously did see.
And that was helpful to have that reminder, because it's so easy to focus on fixing one particular element that you missed, things that might not be as top of mind.
Interesting. I think the videos skip a little bit. So sorry, I think you're missing some of the video. I think that's just somehow the connection did something odd. So While these interactions show promise that participants are able to integrate this type of in-action feedback into their workflows in creative ways, as we've seen with a lot of these sort of human-AI collaboration tools, we also saw evidence here in this tool of the potential risks of over-reliance. Let's see if it starts.
It's an element of, I guess, like unifying that I felt like I was participating in, which I was like, personality maybe. I'm just like, I want to win. Like, I want there to be no issues. Like, my goal is now no issues. So like having that there, I feel like makes me more likely to try to aim for that, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but and maybe it makes me rely on that more than just like trusting my own eyes on what is good.
So especially given that this feedback can come during a design session, it can greatly impact the designer's overall sense of creative ownership and freedom. So this is a strong argument that our educators often adopt for not providing this unlimited, always available feedback. So going back to that expert annotation that we saw earlier, we have some work in submission where we more systematically collected annotations from expert designers and instructors across a number of design principles. In particular, we wanted to use those to explore how providing novices with these types of visual annotations might impact that over-reliance, ideally reduce, by serving as explanations to support novices in doing their own decision-making and evaluation of that feedback that's provided. So here, this design has an issue with the principal hierarchy, which pertains to the relative importance of elements in the design. So in particular, this has a weak point of entry, meaning that there's no clear point of visual emphasis or no entry point, as the title is only very slightly emphasized over the location and date with the use of the capital letters. So through this exploration of annotations, we're also asking if novices sort of prefer this more awareness-centered or solution-centered annotations I'll describe shortly, and if there are trade-offs in things like effective outcomes and productivity versus creative agency and learning. So awareness-centered annotations are more similar to the annotations shown earlier. They embed a representation of the core concept of the principle. However, they sort of rely on the novice to then interpret the overlays themselves. So the awareness annotation here shows that the title, location, and time are all perceived as high importance, so they're shown in the blue. And then the novice would need to realize that maybe they shouldn't be of equal importance, or decide that intentionally they indeed do want them to be visually equivalent. And then solution-centered annotations more explicitly call out the issues in red and then suggest solutions for solving them. So those are drawn as green arrows, a little small here, but they would suggest making the title larger or the location and time smaller. So I hope that through these projects, I started to show you how much tools can influence a user's agency, and that this lens of expert vision can help us take some steps towards designing computational tools that can scaffold novices to train and develop their own personal perspectives as they're exploring these sort of intermediate actions and making intermediate decisions. Then, now I'll jump a little bit to the thread that Jingyi started talking about, and describe the artistic support tool that I designed with my partner. So our AST explored this question of, can a CST be buggy? And can a CST make coding and art more approachable? And these will make more sense shortly. So I want to start by just sharing the artist's statements. Imposter syndrome has been a constant, oh, this is mine. Imposter syndrome has been a constant in my life. In attempting creative coding for the first time, I felt limited by both my artistic and coding skills. Sharing art, very scary. Coding up these artistic ideas, also scary. However, in the process of coding and accidentally introducing bugs, rather than causing frustration in this case, the bugs actually inspired new ideas that resulted in natural deviations from the initial coding plans, generally reducing the intimidation of creating art, both creating art and writing code. And then my partners, graphics was a huge inspiration for me to get into coding, but I was always too intimidated by everything I felt like I needed to know. Over time, as I got deeper into graphics, I created my fair share of bugs and just saved them in a screenshots folder. Turns out I wasn't alone. A few of the bugs in Critter Canvas actually bring in key ideas in graphics so the bug might rewrite your code as something that is more readable, like warp polar, blah, 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 rather than the actual math, to gradually expose a beginner to the concepts without scaring them away by the math, and then you could kind of dig into it yourself. So we kind of shared this similar sentiment of wanting to reduce intimidation and viewing bugs in code as an opportunity for both inspiration and playfulness, as well as for supporting learning. So here's the tool we built with the help of AI, which we called Critter Canvas, as you already heard. So the code and the canvas panel is on the left, where users can both edit their code and preview the output. And then the tree is on the right of sort of saved designs. And so now let's allow the bugs to join our art creating session. It's not supposed to have sound. Uh-oh, this might be just us in the hotel. So here you can see a bug considering mischief and then introducing a code bug into the code. So to help users find the edit, it highlights the part of the code it might tweak and then leaves a bug was here comment. So let's watch that again real quickly. A small detail we included is that different bugs introduce different types of code bugs, or can be seen as sort of having their own personalities and artistic styles, or maybe like different brushes. So now I'm clicking through to see these past saved designs. These were all for the AMB that Jingyi showed. And so if the user wants more chaotic bugs, they can also click this I'm feeling lucky button. And many of our participants really enjoyed playing with this. And so here's some art made by our fellow artistic support tool designers and participants. So this is someone brought in their own brush and then played around with the bugs here and then drew with it. Here is someone testing out the I'm feeling buggy and really liked this result. Here is another participant just generally curious what the I'm feeling buggy would generate. So here are many different results, click after click. And then this is another one where a participant brought in their own processing code from the past and played with painting here and seeing what bugs would introduce. I'll just scrub through so you can see some different things it created. This is an odd interaction. Yay. Okay. And we saw many different ways in which Critter Canvas helped reframe how participants thought about code and bugs. So I like how this is one of the only tools where you can leave it alone and come back, and it's made art. I was socializing myself to the code by watching the bugs, because I would see the bugs make changes, and then I'm like, all right, I can change that number too. I feel like a bug. I love code, but sometimes it's hard to feel artistic with it. There's a pressure to always know what you're doing and how to articulate it, like a pressure to compose a grand masterpiece and perform it perfectly, but Critter Canvas feels like playing jazz. It's freer. You accidentally stumble into serendipitous possibilities that you wouldn't have thought of, wouldn't have been able to articulate otherwise. And then one last reflection on this, aligned with the overall messaging of the project, we ended up prototyping this idea with GenAI, thinking that maybe it would introduce bugs that could potentially be inspiration for new ideas. But I'll leave you with a question here that we've been grappling with due to this decision to implement with GenAI on this project. We wanted to think about how could we open source this project to allow people to actually adapt this to other creative domains through other creative coding languages, such as GPU rendering or music, etc. But since we made this decision, the code is kind of very hard to play with and not very structured in a way that it's easy to plug and play. So just something to think about. And of course, none of this work would have been possible without these great collaborators and supporters. I decided to follow this career path to be a professor because I love working with students. So it's been incredibly meaningful to finally start having my own PhD students. And thank you. With that, I'll end my talk and hand off to Shm.
Thank you. So, oh, you hear? There is a live demo in the next talk.
Can everyone hear me okay?
For the online audiences. But I guess, yeah, I can see the meter going up, so.
Okay,
Perfect.
cool,
Thank you.
awesome. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties. It's nice to meet everyone. はじめまして。私の名前は Shm G Almeda, but you can call me Shm. I am a PhD candidate at the University of California, Berkeley. I work in the Berkeley Institute of Design Lab. Today I'll be talking to you about my approach to CST research. Thank you so much to my senpais, Jane and Jingyi, for warming you up here. We all research CSTs and their work has been really influential and supportive of mine, and so I really appreciate that. And so I see my approach to researching CSTs as an act of stepping into artistic worlds. My work seeks to understand the act of designing a CST as a community and cultural intervention. So I'm really privileged in that the research that I do is the same kind I've been enjoying doing since I was 6 years old. And that is when my sister got her first Wacom tablet, and I got to watch her draw on the computer for hours. Watching artists work has taught me so much about art, and it has also taught me so much about technology. Studying her art practice gave me an appreciation for what artists can teach us, a kind of knowing that you can't learn from books or even articulate. It's a kind of knowing you can only gain by witnessing and appreciating human creativity. My sister, Christine, is now a professional children's book illustrator, and I'm now a professional creativity researcher, I guess. But I will never forget that we started our careers as anime fan artists, taking online commissions and selling prints and keychains online at anime conventions and on our online store. And this taught me so much about how art is not made by individuals alone. It is created by communities and it is created by cultures. Nihon no bunka wa hontou ni utsukushii. And so I really appreciate this honor to come here and talk to you and appreciate how much the community and the culture built around Japanese culture and around global internet culture and creativity culture has supported me in many people's lives. So this is a bit of a newish way of thinking about CST research as sort of a larger, broader, contextual way of understanding creativity, though it's not too new. To reiterate the background shared by my senpais, CST is a field of HCI that has historically asked, how can we build tools to better support creativity? So in this world, we have creators, and they create cool things. Artifacts like paintings, videos, songs. HCI has historically applied a user-centered, process and artifact-oriented focus to understanding and identifying needs and opportunities for CST design. And this has led to an increasingly vast space of tools for supporting the creation of artifacts like video games, animation, anime, orchestral compositions. And so these feats of creativity have been made possible and accessible thanks to CST research. And we've motivated and evaluated CSTs by asking how can these new tools improve the process of creation, making it more efficient, immersive, and less effort. And we've embedded these values in tools that we use for evaluation, like the Creativity Support Index. I first learned about this way of approaching the design of technology and evaluating it in 2019, I believe, when I first did my first CST study with Adobe Research. So this is work completed prior to my PhD as a junior in undergrad. I had this amazing opportunity to work with Stephen and Jose at Adobe Research and make B-Pigment, which is a CST that implemented a novel color mixing algorithm and gave us new ways of controlling how digital paint mixes on a digital canvas. And when it came to evaluate this system, I got artists to try it, and I asked them, what can us technology designers do to better support artists like you? And I probably should have asked a less open-ended question, but I was very new to HCI research, and I wasn't really sure how to design a good study. And I was really hoping that they were going to say better color mixing algorithms, because that's what I had already built. And instead, they said things like, how do I get the algorithm to promote my art online? And what do I do when someone reposts my art without crediting me? And can the Creative Cloud subscription be a little more affordable? Is that something that you, as an intern for one summer, can make happen? And so today I have very similar conversations about AI and how it's developed and how it is disrupting creative livelihoods. Artists and me find this recurring tension in how we sort of expect neat, solvable CST problems to be versus the messiness in what we're actually dealing with. From struggling with social media algorithms and creative labor rights and data scraping and plagiarism, et cetera, the issues that creatives face deserve support. But at times I've thought maybe these aren't questions that we as technology developers are meant to solve. You know, like these lie outside of supporting artifact creation, so what can we do? Today I want to argue that these issues are a result of artists struggling from a lack of sociocultural support, from working within an ecosystem that does not offer them adequate social, cultural, or economic support, that this is an issue of art being incapable, unsustainable for us to create alone, that we need social, cultural, and economic ecosystems and networks to support art making in society. So that means to understand how to truly support artists, we need to research art communities as social, cultural, and economic contextual communities. In some ways, this is not a super normative way of approaching CST research. HCI has researched social creativity with collaborative CSTs, but a lot of those issues I mentioned involve people and activities and roles that we wouldn't really call collaborative. But researchers, including my senpais, have started to address these broader dynamics impacting artistic support. Artist support networks that Jingyi mentioned from John Junyoung Chung et al. Discusses how a creator does not make art alone, their art making is enabled by the many people supporting them. And Beyond the Artifact, Jingyi et al.'s paper, discusses the cultural and community norms and power dynamics that influence how creators use tools. I echo them in noting this methodological shift in CST research away from product and towards process and context. And I think this wave of artistic support research is evidence that we, as a technology research community, want to support the reality of artists' work within entangled networks and communities. So this approach is not at all new to the field of art sociology. So namely, I just want to point to Art Worlds by Howard S. Becker, where he describes this method of studying art making as the collective activity of a network of interdependent communities, and did this by studying orchestras, theater companies, photography studios, and novel writers. And so this is a lot of the foundation that builds my work, artistic support research in HCI, and art sociology work. And today I will talk about my theoretical framework that I built on top of this foundation together with those who worked with me on our Creativity Supportive Ecosystems project. This is a way of understanding sustainable creativity as the activity of interdependent human communities. And then I'm going to demo some systems that this theoretical approach has led us to developing. I'll show you two design probes, one called Artographer and one called Artifactor. And I'll also demo two more artistic support tool systems, as Jingyi and Jane mentioned, our artistic support tool piece. And so I like to think of artistic support tools as developed from this idea of seeing the tool research and development community as an artistic community itself, an ecosystem itself. And the people in it who build tools, or toolsmiths, as Kato sensei would describe himself, as artists making art pieces, and as tools as things that can contribute knowledge in the way that art pieces can. So yeah, that's what I'll talk about today, and I'll start with talking about the work we did for our paper, Creativity Supportive Ecosystems. And so this paper is about expanding creativity support in HCI, and this piece I was very lucky to do with creative community researcher Joy Kim at Adobe Research, and my amazing advisor, DJ Bjorn Hartman. So to build this framework, I'll mention briefly our qualitative research sort of theory building approach. We use constructivist grounded theory and art sociology and the CST literature that I discussed earlier. This builds the foundation for us to build a theoretical framework. And then what we did is we went out and we challenged this and refined and built this framework through 3 rounds of qualitative data collection. So we first recruited 17 artists actively sharing art online, 5 data stewards, and that's data scientists and engineers with experience gathering and using data to train AI models. And finally, we interviewed 3 data artists who have an intersectional perspective. So these are creators who share work online and use data to train models for creative purposes. And so we had artists share their perceptions and practices, asking how do they support a creative practice today. we wanted to broaden and challenge this perspective in the context of what's happening right now socioculturally online and around AI art use. So we asked how creative artifacts are being distributed, used, and reused as data. And then we used this to contextualize our understanding of how artists deal with reuse in general and in the context of AI training. This gave us a multifaceted perspective on the online art world and the spectrum of overlapping nuances involved in how creative value flows online. I'll share some of our findings now. So first of all, we found that creation does not happen in isolation. It is driven and influenced by distribution. As A15 put it, what being an artist really is like 10% making art. The rest is like your Instagram and your website and updating things and shipping stuff. So what artists make, they make to share. Art making in isolation with no one to share your work with or no audience to receive the creative product that you're building is wholly unsustainable. What artists create is driven and influenced by how and with whom they will share their work. So that's their peers, their audience, their patrons, their clients. As A3 stated, this distribution work requires a totally separate brain, separate tasks, separate skills. In other words, distribution is a huge source of labor, tasks that may not be super creative to an artist, like promoting your work on TikTok, or setting up microphones and lights before the show, or packing and shipping merch orders. These tasks need to get done for an artist to get their work out there, and therefore support their art making. But the thing is, some people do find those tedious distribution tasks creative, and those people are distributors. Curators, publishers, and promoters manage distribution tasks in other art worlds, aggregating artifacts into galleries and publications and promoting it to the right audience. And these roles do exist online, but artists are increasingly handling the bulk of distribution themselves by reaching for and depending upon social media tools. I'll circle back to this later, but to hint at what I'll talk about in the future, this is why I've moved a lot of my work into thinking about how I can be more of a curation support individual and build creation support, publication support, and promotion support systems because of how much I've realized this is really central to artists getting their work out there and finding an audience to support them ecosystemically. So distribution is so important because it generates value just inherently. Distribution notably generates financial value like commissions and ad revenue. Every time somebody sees your art on a social media platform, it's generating someone some ad revenue. And so those stand out as crucial here. But participants were driven by a desire to connect or make a name for themselves in a community. And that's really why people choose to be artists and choose to make art. To acquire the kind of social and cultural value that makes a creative livelihood fulfilling and sustainable. Returning the value generated by distribution and reception to the original creators sustains the creative ecosystem. I use the word provenance to describe the ability to trace an artifact back to its origin, but in this context, I use the term kind of loosely to describe the ability to return value back to those who contributed to creating it. A provenance system affords giving back to the creative community with respect. So that might mean crediting the artist, paying them royalties, investing into the ecosystem in a way that supports more of the creative activity that created that value. So creators use reverse image search, this is a kind of provenance system, to retrieve provenance once it's been lost. And they'll use watermarking to try and maintain provenance. This is something I've done before. Even though it makes the art a little uglier, it's important for people to be able to trace it back to me or to the original artist. I'm highlighting these support systems for two reasons. One, it's a critically under-designed space. And two, because returning value to original creators, maintaining this feedback loop where those contributing value to a community are sustained in their ability to continue doing creative work, I think we really need more infrastructure to facilitate this kind of sustainable online behavior. This creative sustainability is a defining theme in how communities recognize supportive reuse versus unsupportive reuse. So somebody acting respectfully versus being a plagiarist. Artifacts get reused and reposted all the time online. And we call an actor who is wielding this kind of responsibility over someone else's work a steward. And as HCI researchers, we know that reuse is not inherently harmful. Redistribution is not inherently harmful. It's quite the opposite. Artists appreciate good stewards who are creatively remixing or promoting their work to a wider network, as long as it's done with respect and with care. And in practice, that typically means that the value generated returns to the original creator or to the community in some form. And so when that happens, we can call that supportive reuse and redistribution. And that's supportive creative behavior. Wow. And system design directly influences this, I think. So Tumblr is a platform where provenance is built into their reblog system. And artists describe Tumblr reposters really, really positively. Meanwhile, reposting screenshots without linking to the original artist is super commonplace on Instagram. A1 described Instagram-based repost accounts as disheartening. They miss the point of curation, bringing attention back into the artist, getting them into the art world. When a steward, intentionally or not, intercepts value, improving their own reception or income instead of forwarding it back to the original artist, this value interception is a defining theme in how artists characterize unsupportive reuse or plagiarism. And so every community and where they draw their lines is different. But if your activity can be described as extracting value, maybe reposting art and pretending it's yours, or taking en masse a bunch of artists' labor and not paying them fairly for their contributions to the culture, then that is more likely to be seen as disrespectful behavior, as plagiarism, or unsustainable. Now, what are the implications of this in theory to the real world concrete situation of people reusing art to train AI? So how are AI developers reusing art as data sets? So I've come to see, after talking to artists, data stewards, and data artists, every data set and every AI model as a redistribution and reuse of artwork. And I have some fun animations for this. We all get to watch together. And so if every art model has been trained on such a derivative data set and every interface that uses those AI models is a redistribution and a reuse of creative work, how can we see this as a way that AI can be inherently harmful, but also how can we think of this as a way that an opportunity for us to be designing counter narratives? Is there a way to imagine this reuse as supportive? I contest that it's very difficult to imagine because we've normalized and we've created a normative ground where it's really hard to imagine what these systems can look like treating artwork with respect. And that sort of creates some of the foundation and the motivation for the work that I'll share next. Because the norms are that we sort of carelessly, large-scale scrape images from the internet without context. This is something I'm thinking about a lot. And I think it contributes to this stigmatization around AI and around data science in relation to artist communities, that a lot of artists see AI as basically just like a giant form of plagiarism. And this is our responsibility that we need to take accountability for as technology designers and take on the accountability of how can we design something different. And I also want to note that this is also an opinion shared by artists who use AI and by artists who do data science, that they see unsupportive reuse of art for AI as something that's threatening the sustainability of their community. Okay, let me skip over to here, which is where I'll say, if you take one thing from this seminar, I hope it's that when you design a tool for making images or music or software, you are shaping more than the productivity of one creator. Creating a new system for art making is founding a new medium. It's founding a new world of communities and subcultures and supply chains. So researchers and developers being interested in creative technology has led to all of these CSTs that we have for art and music and film. But when it comes to all of the other forms of labor and systems necessary to support art making in our society happening sustainably and respectfully, individual artists are relying less and less on community supporters and more on social media platforms and their increasingly opaque systems. If we allow social media companies to be the dominant design force for the rest of these things here, we're entrusting them and their incentives to shape the future of culture and media and creative communities. So that's what led me to be interested in making a CST as a design exploration into alternative interfaces for creative distribution and reception support. And when I say alternative, I mean an alternative to the dominant interface design paradigm that we are using for discovering and consuming art right now, which increasingly looks like this. Beyond worrying that short-form, infinite scrolling video feeds are causing brain rot or whatever, my biggest concern here is how little this interface design actually encourages viewers to remember or even read the names of the artists who are making this creative content, let alone care about the cultural background or the community context for why they're making art. It sort of instead encourages these really rapid interactions that get you to view more content and more ads. I don't think that this is the only way we can design our interactions with art, but it's a big movement towards this is a lot of the ways we intermediate our interactions with art. And so I've been thinking about how we can go from content recommendation systems to respectful artistic curation systems. And so this brings me to a system I want to share with you. This is Artographer, which is a system we made to explore using 2D space and embedding spaces as an experimental substrate for curation. Curation meaning the work of selecting and presenting a set of artworks. Artographer selects and presents a data set of artworks as a spatial map. Artworks that are similar or related are presented closer together. This is an area I call abstract art space. It becomes more representational as we move towards the center. And users can pin and collect artworks that they like to assemble a collection. Near the center of the map, there's a bunch of artworks that are closest to the average artwork in this particular data set. In this case, we have an overrepresentation of European portraits of European people. So there's kind of a density of those that happen to get placed there. And when you move off to the edges, you get more of the other kinds of art spaces for this particular set, like the abstract area I showed you earlier, or this southeastern area region where all of the Asian artwork actually ended up. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, in the context of a creativity supportive ecosystem, we can place this here in that this is an alternative to how we distribute artwork. And so it's a system that uses computation to curate artwork for consumption, which is similar to what a recommendation feed does, but it tries to do it in an alternative way and explore the implications of that. So certainly a different kind of interface design for distributing artwork. But our study actually ended up being a study of reception. So we used Artographer as a probe to understand the creative activity of collecting artwork and what it means to explore and collect artwork in this way. And there's a fun story I want to tell you about here. So here is one of my favorite moments from the study. Something I didn't mention yet is that some users totally refuse to use this, actually. There is an image generator in Artographer. And in fact, a handful of our novice users were interested in the study not due to an interest in art history, but due to an interest in AI-generated images. So P3 reported using Midjourney pretty frequently to generate fantasy landscapes. And when you generate an image in Artographer, it places you next to that image's nearest visual neighbors. And P3 ended up in this area full of 19th century landscapes painted by Albert Bierstadt. And he loved them because he couldn't believe that they were real. He said, it almost looks like they're all Midjourney generated. I've seen a lot of AI-generated images that now it's hard to tell if these are AI-generated or not. But wow, I like these. If you showed me this, I would say that this was AI-generated. I didn't know that these would be real. And then at the end of the study, we asked them to share their favorites. They picked all Albert Bierstadt paintings, which is very interesting, and then said, it's interesting how people actually drew this in the past. And these aren't AI generated. And it looks like it really, really requires talent. So that was a fun story. That was a fun thing that happened. And I'm also interested in how I could get people who are interested in art because of AI and because of all of this energy that is being poured into the aesthetics we can access through AI, and then giving them better, deeper access to the cultural context that make that so powerful, and contextualize that experience. And also, I'm interested in how we can deepen experiences like this, because Albert Bierstadt actually made a lot of these paintings inspired by a sort of manifest destiny, colonization sort of driven attitude towards the American West, and how can we bring those sort of deeper contexts for the reasons why we like certain imagery into our interactions with art. So that's something I'm thinking about. Something I'll briefly mention, because I would love for you all to submit to our workshop, the Herding Creative Activity Traces workshop at CHI 2026, is that because we designed Artographer as a research probe, so as a means to understand creative activity, not just to help us make art faster or more efficiently, we were able to trace participants' creative activity as they moved around the map and collected artworks. So every square is an artwork they interacted with, and every star is an artwork that they liked enough to collect. This is P12's exploration trajectory. And so yeah, I'm really interested in this as a direction for creative design probes, that we can learn about how people like art and how people interact with it by tracing the ways that they do creative things with the tools that we give them. Yeah, and let me skip forward a bit. Something I wanted to mention is that the data for Artographer comes from a public domain art data set. So we drew from WikiArt. We also drew from the Artsy Genome Project, which is an art tagging project that has this really deep, rich system of tagging different characteristics of artworks. And there is actually a way for you to browse the data set here. Actually, can we switch over to showing things? My earring just fell out. That's amazing. I think we should switch over to my web browser if I can get her over there. Okay, let's do that. I'm not going to try and full screen it because I'm afraid. But I wanted to show that you can access the Artographer database that we built or assembled from existing databases. And it's something that now that we sort of have this pipeline and way of curating artwork computationally, that I want to build much more systems and also work with more specific cultural data sets. So now that we've learned about curation, what does it look like to build interfaces that are culturally sensitive to a very specific cultural data set, like a Japanese art data set or a Filipino art data set, or even more specifically, like only a small group of art that has using a specific material is something that the art historians who participated in our study talked about being really interested in. And this idea of these slower, smaller, more reflective ways of working with art data, which are very counter to this design paradigm of scraping as much images as possible with as little context as you could get away with. I think we can do richer things with this. And in fact, we already have built another interface on top of this same database. So after doing all of that data work, we can make a bunch of different ways of interacting with it. So this is Artifactor, which is a system for using provenance as a way of creating and crafting. And so here somebody has generated an image of a guy eating spaghetti. And what it will do is it will look up visually similar artworks in our database. And so it pulled up this guy. And it sort of pulls up these sort of like lookup windows and allows you to use these images that have been determined as visually or semantically similar, like these all have food in them, to make more things. So I can take these, the bits of text about the different art tags that everything has, and then make them all materials. And then I can generate more things from those. And so it's kind of like taking the act of Wikipedia rabbit holing into a database or a set of information and making it more of a creative or a crafting act, and as another way of like getting people to have fun with and do creative activity together with materials that also gets them back interested in the historical and cultural context. And lastly, I just wanted, now that I have this up, to show you a couple other really cool artistic support tools that we made as part of our artistic support tool pictorial, kind of a separate topic, but y'all had the introduction already. This is Fade Draw by Joy Kim, amazing Adobe researcher I also mentioned earlier. And so Joy made this piece, and you will see that as I make strokes, after a little bit, they start to fade away. And Joy wrote this beautiful artistic statement about how this tool is an art piece that it sort of expresses her feelings about art online and art distribution online becoming more and more brief and less interested in staying with us, less interested in staying with the artists that make it, and that the push on social media to distribute art in a particular like rapid engagement-driven way has made art online a bit less fulfilling for a lot of communities. And this last piece I'll share is by Isabel Lee, who was also one of the first authors on the creative misuse paper. And what we have here is a system called Draw Your Attention. And you'll notice that as I draw on this pad, the story that is being told at the top there becomes clear enough for me to read. But if I stop doodling in order to actually read the story, it starts to scramble. And so this piece replicates the process of using doodling to pay attention to something, and how this is an experience that a lot of people have, that I have as a neurodivergent person, that I've gotten yelled at before in class because doodling is not something you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be paying attention. But really, doodling is a process that helps me pay attention. And I think this is a very interesting thing to do as a statement as a CST researcher, because the artifacts that you end up making in the system are difficult to make in such a way that focuses on the product being good or perfect or pretty. And instead, it becomes about this process of using art making to understand Isabel's experience, but also to understand the story that they've written. So I think this is a really cool piece that you can't really make in any other way. And yeah, I think that's the last thing that I wanted to share. And I'm not going to try and go back to my slides, because again, I'm scared that I'm going to mess it up. But I want to thank you all for your time and letting me share my work, and letting me also share our community's work, and welcome you all into our community as creativity support researchers, which is now a wonderful global community. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great that you did the live demonstration of the systems, which is really great. Thank you. So in the following session, we will have a panel discussion. But before that, we would like to introduce Professor Kumiyo Nakakoji, who's going to announce the opening of the panel session and also introduce herself and her work.
Hi, so hello everyone, and thank you very much for the very exciting, interesting talks. And I'm supposed to be here as a moderator or to introduce a panel, but I have so many excitement, and I want to share a little bit of what I remember, what I've been thinking for a little bit. So I'm spending like 5-6 minutes to give you to share my own experience with you guys, and then I'll switch to the a panel. So you will invite all the speakers here and talk, have a panel. So supporting creativity, and so I think we've been listening lots of creativity support tools, but there are so many things shared with the HCI, which is basically supporting tools, supporting something tools, tasks. Productivity or communication, and those supporting tools in general. And then most of us here are from computer science, so we are talking about creativity support computational tools. But they're like paper and pencils and all those things. It somehow support creativity. And then what I'm personally interested in is not necessarily tools part, but creativity support. So how can we support creativity? So what is the creativity? And creativity has a lot of definitions. And through my experience, creativity, I think in a very naive sense, it as the aspect of an artifact, or creativity as the aspect of a person, a creative person, or creativity as recognized in the society as Csikszentmihalyi defined, or creativity as recognized in the context, like Gravno introduced, or creativity as an element in the creative process. So, some creative process, who knows who defines the creative process or not, but there's this element, or creativity as a moment in the creative process during creating something. So it's a thinking process, but while you're creating something, and then somehow you call it a creative process. And creativity as the consequences of the inspiration. Some of the three speakers touched this sort of inspiration part. And then creativity as experience. And so I'm going to share with you some historical development of our research in a tool for creativity and supporting creativity. And I think initially we've been dealing with tools to cope with design fixation. How to cope with the designer's fixed on a certain decision, and then how can we sort of shifting their attention. And this was the original kitchen designer supporting tools that it was my dissertation work. And it's like 30 years ago, but somehow a kitchen designer interacts with the system, and the system gives a feedback, this so-and-so is violating some rules, and this is why it's violating the rules. And you can, the system can describe you why it's better and why you should change your goal in the first place. So those are the things that the system provides. And by interacting with this tool, what is happening in the user studies is that people, naive novice users, novice kitchen designers, new to the kitchen design, often agrees with whatever the system suggests. But the professional ones, many times they disagree with whatever the system says, with so many ongoing arguments. And they all of a sudden became able to articulate what is going on in their thinking process. And I thought this is the room for computational techniques to support people's creativity. So that's my initial thinking. This was the Japanese version. The task itself was done in English at the University of Colorado Boulder. So that's the beginning. And then I was thinking about the effect of feedback. But as so that the system shows something to a person, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And why it differs person to person. So how should the computational tools provide information to the person? But it really depends on this person's historical development. And Maturana and Varela, it's a very good way of saying that we are structure-determined system, meaning that we are really framed by our own historical development. Therefore, even though each person has a very different, how can we say, cognitive moment, even if we are sharing all the things together, each of us is different. Therefore, you provide some feedback, information, whatever, how it affects the person is different person to person, the moment to moment, context and context. So that's another thing which is interesting. It's not adapting to a user, but this is the very beginning. We are all different, and the information really works differently in different people. So, and we cannot really predict in a correct manner. So in that sense, we've been studying a little bit of sketching, and why the sketching really, even the manga animators often use, still use the sketching, hand drawing, and why the hand drawing matters. Because the process of externalization is shaped by the tools used to externalize ideas. Therefore, their pen shape with the hand moving and the visual things sort of emerging really affect the way they think. And so we started thinking on how can we design tools to support the sketching process in a different domain. And at the same time, we observed a lot of sketch designers. This is one of the sketches from the interaction designers. And this person draws and draws the same thing many times. And it's not that those are the information this designer needed, but he said that by drawing, he can gradually understand the problem domain in the head. So it's not the externalized information, but the process of externalizing and moving the body really helps the person to understand what's going on. So I thought that was really hilarious. And then we extended this sketching experience into writing. So writing a text tools, and we call it a representational talkback, looking at the Donald Shane's back talk of the situation. So drawing all those externalization is the way that people create the situation that talks back to you, and then you can listen to the situation, and then you can have a better understanding. And so this is Japanese, but this is English. We aim to enable writers to work with an emerging text in the same way designers use sketches when exploring layouts. Selecting and hiding parts of the text, the system creates a state that simulates deletion and allows comparison with the current state. By adding elements, the system creates a state and So this was the tool, long, this again 15 years ago or 20 years ago. But by the way, we designed this writing system for the early stages of writing. It allowed people to, just like sketching, you can just drag the chunk of text, but instead of deleting and copying and texting, pasting, you can physically dragging to change the arrangement, or always being able to look at the situation. Or you can do a trial and error kind of thing by changing the positioning of the text. And that was really helped us, this really helped us to understand what's going on in a creative process, serving as like a design probes. And finally, our recent project, it's called Stats Hakodate, and we are using a large volume of local historical statistical tables as a source of mutual inspiration and collective creativity. And this work is in collaboration with Hibiki Sasaki, who is sitting in the back today. And in here, we wanted to museumify the volume of very unorganic, really dry, boring statistical tables. So we had 1,260 pages of just statistical tables, the table. And it's really boring. But if we really carefully look at each page, this was from mid-1800s to 1900s. So it's a historical ones. And then we can find very strange things. Like this is the number of average of number of members of a household. And in 1 year, in 1900, they are all 5.0. So obviously somebody made a mistake or intentionally made up the statistical data. And by looking at those tables here and there, you can find lots of interesting things. Sorry, mostly in Japanese. But so we had different kinds of workshops to let people to annotate and find all those interesting parts by using like iPads and annotating it. For instance, this one, inbound, outbound numbers of people in one station. All of a sudden, this year, 1 year, it starts inbound, outbound. But up to that year, there's one sort of a column. And why? We had no idea. And then the people started simulating or creating really narratives or fictitious stories to interpret what's going on in those narrative statistical tables. So like in this case, the numbers of trains, tram trains in 1950s, all of a sudden the number got decreased. And what happens? Because they work too hard, and so on, so on. So we use those physical settings, or we use the large settings. And so the part is, by having these little sort of a setting, environment, little setting, and have a people, and then they get a lot of inspiration, and they get some creativity. And I think that aspect can also be explored in supporting professional creative people like animators. So these are creativity. In the beginning, I listed like creativity as something, and I think in this audience, I think we are using creativity as the last three one, as an element in the creation process, or creativity as a moment in the cognitive process during creating something, creating as the consequences of inspiration. And those are, I think, what we are coping with. But as the three speakers were talking, I got this last one, creativity as experiences. So it's not necessary as producing creative artifacts, creative design decisions, creative something, but you want to enjoy the creative experience. So I know it's really hard to write a paper about this, but that's the sort of, I think, as a computer scientist who are interested in humans, we should kind of carry this kind of thinking in order to not damage the creative practices in the Japanese sort of anime field. So these are the keywords or key phrases. Like by listening to the three of the speakers, it came to my mind that in artwork everything is a remix. So, but in AI, generative AI, some people are really opposing this sort of remix culture and why and how and is it wrong, blah, 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 blah. So that's one question. Guiding and scaffolding, those terms kept emerging in the talks. Guiding, scaffolding. But both guiding and scaffolding kind of have a notion that somebody knows the right thing. So is it? Okay. Then, or sometimes there's a difference between you know what to aim at versus you know how to produce the desired situation. So exploring the desired situation versus how can we make this desired situation. And the comparison to like experts, novice kind of things are addressing these aspects. And then I think this, one can learn from how experts see things. It's a very interesting thing. And we interviewed animators. A group of us went to an animators, professional animators, and we had an interview. And those animators said that by looking at his like a teacher, his group kind of animators drawing is the most precious moment to learn something. So by looking at how experts does and sees is, I think it's still a very valuable source of the creativity support. And of course, there's this community. And again, within the community, community produces the interesting artifact. Like my advisor, Gerhard Fischer, called the term like a social creativity. And I didn't want to use the social creativity, and then I created like a collective creativity to differentiate a little bit. Because as a group produce something creative versus as an individual within the group feels creative is, I think it's different. So those are kind of phrases or questions that I want to raise to start the panel. Is it okay?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction to the panel discussion. So now we're...
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, well...
So let me start asking questions to you guys.
Yes,
okay. So what do you think of everything you're doing versus what is going on?
Oh, well, I'm not sure what you mean by saying that everything's remixed. Like
some artists have been projects for everything remixed, and because there was some fighting against some famous artists, singer or songwriter, stole some phrase. But since everything is a remix in the sense that artworks, songs, music, all the phrases, and it's a mixture of pre-existing things. So
okay, and now I think I got the question.
Yeah. Right.
So I think in that sense, Shm-san mentioned a very important distinguishment between the collaborative versus
supportive reuse.
Yeah, supportive reuse. And I think it's all social and cultural that we need to, I mean, anyway, we are in the community of people. We do not live alone. And when we create something, we of course need to think of how it's being made. And it also echoes the theme of just focus on the process rather than outcome that in all of the speakers mentioned. So that's my, I think, response.
Can everyone hear this? Okay, cool.
Yeah, actually, it's mainly for the live stream, so it doesn't.
Well, if the live stream's not working, just say something.
On the air. Somebody might tell us.
I feel like I share the opinion that a lot of people have, that a lot of art is remixed, that a lot of art is a repurposing of things that you've seen, even if you are someone who works alone and tries not to get any other inspiration. Everything that we make is usually a communication or a result of things being communicated to you. And then I think a lot of people think the reasonable consequence of that is like, oh, that means we don't have to treat art with respect, or like nothing's original, or maybe it's not even worth making art anymore because it's all just like redone. And I think that's just the slippery slope that one should avoid going down, because there's always reason to make art because everybody has something unique to say. And that means that if every piece of art is something unique to say, even if it's a kind of a remix, that also means that the things that we say and the things we express should be treated with respect for our fellow human. And so I think remix culture is really awesome, and remixing work and making anime music videos from anime content is a beautiful artistic practice that should be treated with as much respect as we would treat any expression from our fellow human and our fellow community members. And that means also not reusing things in a plagiaristic way or a disrespectful way.
Yeah, to expand upon Shm's answer, I'm really inspired by this STS philosopher called Bruno Latour, who always says we should open up the black box of science and basically look at the people behind it, look at like what the social activity behind these like finished artifacts that we don't often have that information for are. I don't know if that was the right sentence. Anyway, point being, like, part of the like exquisite corpse AST, AMV that I showed was like specifically connecting people's clips to other people's clips and being like, oh, can you remix their work to maintain that social connection? Like, I think there's no such thing as like an original source of artwork, because as Shim-san mentioned, like all art is interpretive. It's always responding to other things in culture that we see. But yeah, as like talking about provenance, it's just like, is it explicitly attributed? Is it properly corrected? Does it like pay homage to the people that come before it? And I think when it's done properly, then actually remixing is social support, and it's like strengthening ties with those around you.
Yeah, I think a lot of my thoughts, resonate with what everyone has been saying, but just like our lives and our perspectives are so, like, whether it's subconscious or conscious, we're always kind of remixing something, because we're all influenced by the society, by like the physicality of the world, by various different things. There's sort of this concept of cognition in the wild, right? We're situated in this space. How we interact with physical objects might influence our cognition and how we think, how we interface with society and with culture. That might influence how we think. And so all of these things will influence the art that we make in different ways, whether intentionally or not. But yeah, kind of very related to what I'm saying.
But yesterday we also heard that society is really opposing the way the use of generative AIs, because a lot of generative AIs are using somebody else's something. That's the public views. And how can we sort of, in some sense, educate the society to be generous about certain aspects and still, I don't know, protect the respect for individual artists?
Yeah, thank you, Nakakoji sensei, because I wanted to bring it back to that, and that I started showing generative AI, like image generation models, to artists in around like 2019, 2020, before these very large diffusion models. And in fact, a lot of artists were like, oh, these are interesting, and not really threatened by it. Because, well, one, I was showing them GANs, or generative adversarial networks, and the outputs looked really funky and weird. But I kind of really like those outputs. But I think another reason is that it hadn't done the socio-cultural damage that these really large diffusion models and treatment of data sets has done and has shown artists is creating socio-cultural damage. And so I tell students that are really scared to learn about data science and really scared to learn about AI, there is nothing inherently evil about a really large statistical model. There's nothing inherently evil about a data set, but there is something wrong with us designing these to embed and normalize building them irresponsibly. And because they're the really, really big ones and the really profitable ones have been built irresponsibly with this large-scale scraping, and not sort of the way a curator or a community member or a respectful fan of media would remix art, because those aren't the people building it. It's sort of folks who don't have the same values. We come to associate all of AI and all of data science as inherently always going to be harmful and always going to be evil. And so that's why I try to encourage people who have this appreciation for art, appreciation for artists, and appreciation for culture and history to think about how can we reapply that to build this technology in a new way. And will often mean a slower way or a less well-funded way than the really big corporations are able to build and design them. But I think that is part of our job to do.
Yeah, I want to follow up and shout out another humanities scholar. Karen Howe has this really good book called Empire of AI, where basically she says like OpenAI, what they're doing is like modern day colonialism, and that they're gathering these huge data sets with no accreditation to anyone just to consolidate power for themselves. And there's no reason why your LLM needs like, 10 trillion parameters other than like, oh, we just need more and more data, and it's like very selfish and it's very power grabbing. So I think, as exactly Shm said, like how can we do this in a more culturally sensitive way?
Yeah, I think another way maybe like several of us are also working on in our research is thinking about like how to bring artists more into the design process of thinking about how generative AI could be used in maybe if there is a way to be used in a more helpful way versus in a more, like to try to avoid the more harmful ways, like actually kind of, yeah, like allowing them to really co-design, really like be part of the design process and have respect that voice a little bit more in different ways. But I think like several of us are sort of moving more and more in that direction.
Yeah, I think I cannot agree more with every one of these opinions. And another aspect that I might bring in is the use of Gen AI related technologies in a practical or pragmatic or useful way for the artists or creators in the production process, for example. There are so many Gen AI systems that lowers the burden to create something in a short term. But actually, in the actual production, the creators or the artists, they love repetitive process. They love, these kind of creative activities that they have loved, and how they, expect on the technologies is it's not like making their repetitive or this iterative kind of process shorter, but rather. They want more misuse. They want more of these opportunities to dive into this, new kind of space that allows them to be more creative in some sense. And so to do this, I think, as Jane-san said, it's really important for us researchers to dive into the wild, like, get connected with the artists and practitioners and get to know their culture, and then build the tools together. Which is part of this Animāre project. And so, we are less funded compared to these massive companies or anything that exists there. But we can misuse these LLMs or something that is already generated there. That is something we can do as part of this already existing creative community.
Thank you. Then next topic that I want to bring up is like this guiding and scaffolding versus, I don't know, especially supporting experts. We need something else. And what kind of dimensions or phrases we should use or we can create.
Me? I can also start. Okay, so I can talk about the experiences of Art Crit because it was also really motivated by professional vision, an idea that Jane brought into my world. I just didn't talk about it in the talk. So like Art Crit really follows the Western norm of drawing, where like if you go to a professional painting school, they'll be like, focus on the composition, then focus on the black and whites, then like add the colors, like if you do traditional oil painting and stuff. And I think the idea is, in a lot of like technical execution of art, like you need to know the rules before you break them. So I think as computer scientists, it's much easier for us to develop systems that help people know the rules rather than help people break them, because also from like an evaluative standpoint, like what does it even mean to design a CST where like everything should be broken? I think like that's just also the motivations and incentives of HCI research. So I think that's where I stand of like, okay, we've made a system that helps people follow this, like the normative ground of what is considered to be like correct art practice. But at the same time, I personally feel like all the interesting stuff is like in the incorrect use, like in the misuse and stuff. So I think that's my philosophy towards it, is like, here are the rules, please just go free, like do what you want to figure out how you can break and bend these rules.
I just want to say, actually, professional vision was introduced to me by Matthew Baudouin-Leval, and I really appreciated that. Like, it was something I actually didn't know about when I was working on my PhD thesis, even though it was titled Artistic Vision, and I talk about expert vision. And I think even in that paper, they talk about the fact that two experts came in with very different coding schemes. And coding schemes in the paper, it's by Charles Goodwin, is kind of like, what are the different dimensions or like concepts that are in that expertise, and how do those coding schemes influence how you then view something and how you highlight which pieces are important to pay attention to. And actually, based on these two experts having very different coding schemes, they kind of arrived at different decisions when interpreting something. So I think that very much resonates with the idea of normative ground, and how, like, you know, people might have different ideas, you know, from what might be the normative ground, or even if you're trained with different normative grounds, like, you know, a lot of what we've been doing is a little bit more from like Western textbooks and things like that. And yeah, like, is that the right thing to embed into tools? I think is always, yeah, or versus like, are the types of concepts and grids that we use or something, is it the same in like how in anime or other kinds of cultural perspectives? Like, are there different ways of thinking about composition that, you know, we should allow tools to be flexible horizontally?
I think I can throw one term that might be relevant to this in a technological way, which is malleability. Right? I mean, there is Malleable Systems Collective, where researchers and developers aim at making software more malleable. And I see this as a kind of effort to make normative ground more programmable or dynamic. And I think of this as part of also a kind of, you know, high-level effort to make this normative ground less implicit. Yeah. Like, you know, when we use any kind of tools, we have we are bound to this normative ground. And one problem that I see is that artists sometimes use software as is, and they do not necessarily notice that there is this normative ground. And so to make it more explicit, I think we can make tools as, how to say, more interactive, educational, in a sense that it allows them to see what is the normative ground bound to all these tools and features.
Like, how do you surface some of the assumptions being made by the designers? Yeah.
And this is also relevant to the concept. To me, it looks relevant to the concept of weirdness, like, you know, Western educated, industry-rich, and democratic, in a sense that, like, you know, there is this. To give a context, in HCI, we say that many HCI systems have been evaluated and developed in the Western kind of cultural context. And I see, like, you know, to to counterbalance this, we need to do something non-weird. But then the question is, I mean, whether weird or non-weird, to me, the question is, what is this assumption that, or the biases that we have when we do something? So as in this critical support tool design, we're also thinking of this, making biases more explicit, visible, and malleable and dynamic. So these are all kind of connected themes to me.
And I want to plus one all of that and also bring it back to how important it is, I think, that we do that around AI systems, which are very normalized to be very black box or to be increasingly more obscured and increasingly collect more and more data about you and do more automated behind the scenes. And so there's sort of a direction of people moving that way. And so I think it's important that there's a direction of people moving in the other way of trying to make what are these systems doing like more visible. And to go off of what I've learned also from Jingyi and Jane and Matthew's work about like part of what we wanted to do when we designed the artographer study that I didn't go into so much was not suggest that the system was correct, but that it was a research system that was meant to probe their opinions. And that is why we invited about half of the participants were experts in art history or design history. And so we weren't presenting it as here's a system to solve something for you or that does anything particularly correctly, but more as a conversation piece for them to explain to us, like now that we've made an AI recommendation system more visible because you can see sort of the space of what it's done with the data, how do you articulate this problem of non-European artwork being pushed to the edges, and what would you do differently to present this artwork more respectfully, like what other things should we look at? And they said, oh, you should look at materials, you should collect data on materials, you should focus on this kind of thing, like, oh, it would be helpful for our work if you actually made the map like organized like this. And so by making the prototype sort of intentionally very open and in a way like trying to present it in a radically humble way where we said like this isn't correct and we know this isn't correct, it's to invite you to explain to us how we should be designing these better. I think we learned a lot more than if we tried to like make the perfect art map or something like that.
Going in maybe a slightly different direction, that like surfacing or allowing understanding assumptions. Like one thing that I've gotten a lot of pushback on is a lot of my tools use these like relatively heuristic, like older algorithmic methods. But like a lot of these were intentional decisions to make them easier for people to kind of learn and understand like what is it saying, so then I can kind of make a decision based on my understanding versus something that's maybe a little less predictable. And that's been kind of a weird dynamic building tools in that way, yeah.
So, slightly different topic. I think many of you are interested in sort of a visual art works and visual representations to work on. But in anime fields, there's a storyboard and those narratives and those text information that really, is critical. And yesterday we also heard that those anime people are, by reading it and then they produce the first draw. How can you think that we can support that kind of human activities? Very, I don't know.
You mean like multimedia?
Multimedia, but more like logical logic, or I don't know, by reading emotions, feelings, those
By manipulating
words and symbolic, right.
I mean, I'll say definitely, I have a bias for sure as a visual artist to like always want to be working with images, and so we should shout out some of our colleagues' work that works with text and that works with writing, like Max Kraminski's, Sarah Sturman, David Zhou, doing really cool work with writing, many others. But also something that was humbling was when I was making the art history data set, trying to do any visualizations without text data and without multimodal data, without semantic data. The visualizations were not very interesting. And so you need the information on who was the artist, where was it made, is it from the Renaissance, is it made with oil, is it made with gouache, and to make those connections to other things that share the same tags before you're able to make a visualization that like make sense. Otherwise, it's doing very shallow things like, this has a man in it, so it should be put next to this other thing with a man in it. Or this is black and white, and so this should be put next to another image that's black and white. It would do that even though like it would be a black and white like French photograph next to like a black and white Chinese ink painting. And that could be interesting to do sometimes, but you can do much richer things when you are working with the text and semantic data and the multimodal data. And I'm very excited with the kinds of things we can do with that because historians and cultural studies folks have put together really cool data sets that have multimodal information that I think are underutilized right now.
Yeah, to go off of that, I think one area of future work I'm super excited for is like how can we actually encode cultural interpretation of visual images along with the images. So like Shm mentioned in their sort of beautiful landscape paintings, how it was actually about manifest destiny and like colonization, or like in anime storyboards where you have like a dynamic fight scene, like the composition is like many angles all over the place because that shows movement as opposed to like a very flat sort of composition. Like I think experts know the visual grammar and experts know that it's in reference to the visual language that we all have, but I feel like it is hard to express. And I think the way we do express it right now is like verbally and in words. But I don't know, I just feel like how can we like get the best data representation for that and like link it to the visual imagery?
Yeah, I'm very interested in sort of the cross-modality kind of space of like, well, actually, if you are already like a photographer or visual artist, what are the things that then if you want to pick up music, are there ways that you annotate things from one space that might help you like learn about another space? Not something I've yet done much exploration around, but like say you have an art team of like an electrical engineer, a programmer, an architect, an artist, you know, how do you actually like help support that communication? And I feel like I'm very interested in the visual annotation side of that, just even with like things like text or code, like oftentimes you do draw something that represents your thinking. I had another thought, but it has disappeared. So we'll go with that. Storytelling and narrative. Where I had started was actually thinking about how do you sequence shots. Based on like there's a book called The Grammar of the Film Language, and I think we saw some examples of like, if the camera angle is from above and the person is kind of like towering over you, that seems like more intimidating and more powerful, and that might influence the storytelling aspects and whatever. And also actually like the visual composition, when there are lots of diagonals and things in the composition, that usually is there's more action or like a battle scene. There are various things that describe these types of narratives. But I think something that I was grappling with for a long time was like how much can or should tools, again, like actually influence that aspect of the storytelling, the narrative, the emotion. I do want to kind of go there, but like with the portrait lighting, for instance, it was like, well, there are, different ones that are better depending on what emotion you're trying to, create. But yeah, that was sort of like a space I've been trying to like figure out where do we belong with tools.
Yeah, I should comment on that. Like multimodality and cross-modality. When we go back to the book, like orality and literacy, I think an interesting finding there was that text is sometimes visual. On books, we see text as visual things, and we use the GUIs for manipulating text and typing things. And also, it's not only about visual, but also when we think of this orality, it's audio, right? So we use all these sensory modules to basically interpret the world and also to generate something new from the creative activities. I don't have any answers to this, but it's really interesting to see all these modalities and all these embodied interactions. Thank you.
Okay. So I think it's about time to end.
Wow. Yeah.
So thank you very much for the discussions, and thank you all for being here and the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I believe, I'm pretty sure that all the audiences have questions. Please write it down to the Google Docs, and we might be able to review it later to answer it and to continue the discussion in this community. And so thank you so much for being here, either on-site or online. And thank you for all of these speakers and moderators to be here to make this symposium or seminar possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you for making this happen.
Thank you.